The old asylum had been closed for years. Its walls, once pristine and white, were now crumbling, and its corridors lay empty and still. But despite the eerie silence that hung in the air, a group of urban explorers had decided to break in and see what secrets the abandoned building held. At first, the group was excited to be there. They had brought cameras and flashlights and were eager to explore the old asylum's nooks and crannies. But as they delved deeper into the building, the atmosphere grew darker and more ominous. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls seemed to close in on them. The group soon found themselves in a long, narrow hallway. The only light came from their flashlights, casting an eerie glow on the peeling paint and rusted pipes that lined the walls. They walked in silence, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. It was then that the first strange occurrence happened. One of the group members, a young woman named Claire, heard a faint whisper in her ear. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but the whisper persisted, growing louder and more urgent. She turned to her friends, but they hadn't heard anything. As the group continued down the hallway, the whisper grew into a low, guttural moan. They quickened their pace, their flashlights darting left and right in search of the source of the sound. And then they saw her. A ghostly figure dressed in a long white gown appeared at the end of the hallway. Her hair was wild and unkempt, and her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. The group froze, their eyes fixed on the apparition before them. The ghostly figure floated towards them, her arms outstretched. As she drew closer, the group could see that her hands were covered in blood. They turned to run, but the hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in on them. The ghostly figure reached out and touched Claire's arm, and in that moment, the world around them shifted. The hallway disappeared, and the group found themselves standing in a small, dimly lit room. The room was furnished with a single bed, a wooden chair, and a small dresser. The air was thick with the scent of lavender, and a single candle flickered on the dresser. As the group looked around in confusion, they heard a faint whisper in their ears. It was a voice they couldn't place, and yet it seemed familiar, like a long-forgotten memory. "Help me," the voice whispered. "I'm trapped here. You have to help me." The group realized that they had been transported back in time, to a time when the asylum was still open and patients roamed its halls. They had stumbled upon the ghost of a patient, and now she was reaching out to them for help. As they stood in the room trying to make sense of what was happening, the door burst open. A group of nurses and orderlies stormed in, their faces twisted with rage. "Get her!" they screamed. "Get the witch!" The group backed away in fear as the nurses and orderlies descended upon them. They realized then that they were trapped in the past, in a time when the mentally ill were often accused of being witches and burned at the stake. As the group fought to escape the asylum, they encountered more and more ghosts, each one trapped in a cycle of pain and suffering. Some begged for help, while others lashed out in anger and despair. But as the group finally made it to the front doors of the asylum, they knew that they had to do something to help the ghosts who were trapped in the haunted asylum. They couldn't just leave them there to suffer for all eternity. The group made a plan. They would return to the present and gather as much information about the asylum as they could. They would learn the names of the patients and staff and the events that had led to the asylum's closure. And then they would come back, armed with knowledge and the tools to help the trapped spirits move on. It took months of research, but finally, the group was ready. They returned to the abandoned asylum, armed with sage, crystals, and a Ouija board. As they made their way through the haunted halls, the group called out to the spirits. They lit candles and burned sage, hoping to cleanse the asylum of its dark energy. At first, nothing happened. But then, one by one, the spirits began to appear. They were hesitant at first, unsure if the group was there to help or hurt them. But as the group began to share the information they had gathered, the spirits began to open up. They told their stories of lives lost too soon and injustices suffered. They cried out for justice and for their names to be remembered. And the group listened, their hearts heavy with the weight of the tragedy that had occurred within the asylum's walls. As the night wore on, the group began to feel a shift in the energy of the asylum. The air was lighter, and the shadows no longer seemed to loom quite so darkly. And then, As dawn approached, the spirits began to fade. They thanked the group for their help, and then they were gone, leaving only the quiet echoes of their voices behind. The group left the asylum, feeling drained but also elated. They had done what they could to help the trapped spirits, and they knew that they would never forget the experience. Years later, the group returned to the abandoned asylum, only to find that it had been torn down. But as they stood on the empty lot where the building had once stood, they felt a sense of peace. They knew that they had helped to heal the wounds of the past, and that the spirits of the asylum were finally at rest.